Have you ever wondered what the process looks like to get a book deal and sign a contract with one of the big name publishers? Let's chat about it.
Hi, I'm Kayvion Lewis, and I'm the author of this book, Thieves Gambit, which is coming out from Penguin Teen in September of 2023. I'm also the author of several other books, which didn't quite make it to the publishing stage, and I'm super excited to be here to talk about all things publishing.
And I'm really excited because you've written a number of books and this is your first big traditional contract. I want to break down what that looks like from somebody who has not gone through that process before. So for you, what was the very first step? You wrote your book, you went through all of your editing, then what did you do?
Well, after I'd say the first step was writing all the other books, which gave me the experience to write this book. The first thing that I did was try to, of course, self-edit myself. Self-editing is such a tricky field because you think that you can self-edit a book yourself, but really you need another person's eyes to get a book to the place where it will be able to be sold and to be published. But after we got the book, or I got the book to a decent state, I did something atypical. I applied for a mentorship program called Author Mentor Match, which I think is now defunct. But at the time, it was very prominent in the writer sphere. If you're in the writer Twitterverse, you might have heard of AMM. It's a program that matches aspiring authors with established published authors. And I was selected by Nick Stone to be her mentee for the 2021 session of AMM. And we did a little bit of back and forth ourselves, and she ended up recommending me to a literary agent that she knew who was looking for a big book. And I ended up being signed by that literary agent. Nick was right. She actually did end up liking my book, and she signed me in April of 2021. And my literary agent, Chelsea Eberly, she is super editorial. She likes to acquire projects that she's going to work on a lot herself because she used to be an editor herself at Random House. She was a senior editor there. So we spent about a year revising, and she would send me edit letters. Working with her, even though she wasn't my editor, she was my agent, was very similar to the process of working with an editor, which if you have an editorial agent, it's going to be similar to working with an editor. She would send me edit letters, and we would do line editing together, and we spent a whole year going back and forth, revising, improving upon the book. I ended up rewriting, I'd say maybe at least 60% of the book during that year. A lot of the stuff that really drew her in, like the big set pieces, and of course the overarching plot is the same. I just went back and repolished it and tried to make it even better in the whole book. And so after a year after that, she decided that we were ready to go on submission and try to sell it.
Interesting. So talk to me a little bit more about these editorial notes. I know you said you got emails back and forth. Was it specifically through emails, or did you ever have video meetings or phone calls about this? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think a good agent and a good editor will always be flexible to whatever the author wants and how they work best editing. So it was a lot of a mixture with us. I'd say primarily we went back and forth through email at first, especially when you first sign with your literary agent. I think a lot of people are really a little nervous working with them, and you well, I want to be formal and send emails and think really long about how I'm going to phrase all of my questions. And then once you get to know your agent a little bit better, you usually upgrade to phone calls, or some people text their agents, or video chat. But primarily this industry is incredibly email based. So anytime I would get edit letters or notes, I would always get something in paper that was like a professional letter. An edit letter it looks like an actual letter, which is why it's called an edit letter. It has my literary agent's logo at the top, and it's Dear Kayvion, and then it's 10 pages of, I liked your book, but here's how we can make it better. So everything is primarily email that we would get. And then after I've looked over the edit letter that I had in writing, I would usually call my agent, and we would have maybe an hour-long phone chat about, okay, I understand your thought here, but I'm not sure about how I should implement this. Or can you explain a little bit more about what you're talking about, this character arc? So a good agent will always be there for a phone call or further elaboration on notes that you have. So basically, it was just a year of doing that over and over again.
And I'm sure at that point you get very close to the person that you're working with. Now, you said once you got through that editorial process, it was going to go out on shop. So tell us a little bit about when she started taking your manuscript and moving it around to the different potential people that could be picking it up.
So for me, it happened very abruptly, or at least it felt abrupt to me. After having been editing the book for so long, it felt like, oh, we're actually going to go on submission. I sent my newest draft back to her, and I was expecting another round of editorial notes. And my agent was like, this is great. Let me send the book back to you, and we'll do like some light copy editing. So just some very, very light sentence level editing. And I am going to put together a submission list and send you the people that I think would be interested in this book. So when my agent decided that we were ready to go on submission, we had a call specifically about that, where she answered all my questions about, like I didn't know that you're not allowed to submit to more than one editor at an imprint, and that some of the smaller or still amazing, reputable, smaller publishers might respond faster than a big publisher. So it might be strategic to send to some of the smaller publishers a little bit after you send the first bulk. She was explaining things like that to me. And while she was putting together the submission list of editors who she knew their taste and what they were looking for, she did also ask me if there was any editors that I really wanted to send my book to or wanted my book to be on their desk. I was not super familiar with the world of editors, so I didn't have any input in that. It was completely her who put together the submission list. And our list ended up being 13 editors long. Well, it was a little longer than 13 because we did have a couple at amazing smaller presses that we were going to send to later on, but we didn't quite get to the later on point before we had interest, which was good.
Oh, yeah.
It was really good. So the list that we ended up actually sending out to was about 13 editors, which she referred to that as being selectively large in terms of a first round submission.
Interesting. Okay, so once it goes out to these editors that you are submitting it to, what does that process look like? I know you had interest very early on. I know you had a bit of a bidding war going on, but what did that look like from your perspective?
So it's mostly in your agent's ball court, I'll say, the whole submission process, which that's their job. So I wasn't the one ever emailing editors or anything. So for me, it's always going to be like kind of a backseat role, even though it's your book. It's so weird. But from my perspective, she sent me the list. I approved the list because I just trust my literary agent. And then she told me the day that she was going to start sending it out. And before, she did send me the pitch that she was sending to the editors, which a pitch is kind of similar to a query. But it's kind of got like an opening, like, oh, hey, I haven't seen you in so long, or she sent me all of that. So it was completely transparent between my literary agent and I, like exactly what she would be sending to these editors. My literary agent, I've heard that some agents will pitch editors through the phone or in person, but my agent, she did everything through email. So I was able to see in writing what she was sending to everybody. She sent me that, and then she told me the day that we were going out, and then she sent me an email, I think the morning that we went out, just kind of okay, here we go. Congratulations on making this far, no matter what, sort of supportive email. Yeah. And at that point, I didn't expect to hear back from her for 2 weeks because we'd also decided that we would have a 2-week check-in to see where things were no matter what. So later on that day, I did hear from her again, and she sent me forwards of emails that she'd gotten from editors saying, oh, look at this editor. They responded. They said that they're super excited to read this. They said this is just what they're looking for. And she just wanted to be encouraging. I was thinking that, oh, look at these editors. Even though they haven't started reading yet, they're very excited to read. And I was like, okay, that's great. Now I'm not going to hear from her for 2 weeks. And then the waiting period starts, which you should brace for no matter what when you go on submission. There's always going to be at least a little bit of waiting. And there was a tiny bit of waiting for me as well. Yeah. So Tuesday, the next day, I did not hear anything at all. And then Wednesday was when we got our first interest offer. And whenever you get whenever something really amazing happens in publishing, your agent will almost always like call you, and usually out of the blue, because I guess they like the suspense factor, which that was true for me. 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning, I got the first call from my literary agent, and I was so tired because it was so early in the morning that I didn't put together that maybe it was a good thing. I was kind of like, why is she like calling me? She'll usually email me if she wants to call me and then call me. But she called me and told me that the first editor was interested. And once the first editor is interested, your agent gets to nudge all the other editors and tell them, hey, this other editor is interested and they're probably going to make an offer. So if you want to make an offer, you need to read really quickly. We were lucky enough that the editor who first offered was really direct in saying that she wasn't just interested, she said she was going to make an offer. And saying you're going to make an offer is like, that's a big deal because you get to go back to the other editors and not just say this other person is interested. Like there's like actually an offer. So it makes things like so much more direct and demanding. Yeah. If that makes sense. So I got the call. My agent also told me that I needed to prep for a call because the editor wanted to have a Zoom with me, and it would be in a couple of days because of the editor's schedule. And then she asked me for my schedule for the rest of the week because she anticipated that we were going to be having other editors interested. And we did end up having other editors interested. So I think by the end of the day, that first day, we ended up with 4 more editors who were interested.
Okay.
And in total, we ended up with 8 total who I ended up speaking with, but only 6 of those would end up going to the auction because of publishing reasons.
Sure.
But I hope that was a good answer. I think
that was fantastic.
A bunch of stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great because I think when we are not in it, we don't get to see a lot of the behind the scenes. This very much lifted that curtain so that we were able to see that once it does get shopped around and people do have interest, it can be a very quick process. It can take a little bit of time. If it is quick or if there is movement forward, the author is going to have to do more than just sit there and wait for offers to roll in. You have to have meetings. You have to have conversations. Obviously, we can't talk too much about what happened during these conversations, but just give us a general idea. Is it specific to the book? Are they getting to know you as an author? Are they asking questions about your vision for this? What does that kind of look like on that surface level?
I'd say that most of the conversations were, of course, primarily focused on the book itself and editorial thoughts on the book. But there's also, of course, you do want to get to know this person who you're going to be, if you go with them, you're going to be working with, especially for a book deal that involves more than one book for like a number of years. It's like, I want to have a coworker that I would kind of like to vibe with. And with something as personal as editing a book, you want to make sure that you have like the same sort of editorial mind as the person, that not just for this book, that are they the type of person who thinks the same way that I do when it comes to character arcs? Is this the type of person that's going to really push me for edits? And it's also okay, I want to say, if you are the type of author who you're not looking for somebody who's going to be incredibly aggressive with you in improving your craft. It's all about what you're looking for and what the editor is looking for and seeing if you're a good match. And that's kind of what the entire call is about. So I spent a lot of time. I did have a list of questions that I went in wanting to know from each editor. Of course, my first thought was, what kind of editorial thoughts do you have for the book? What changes do you want to see? And I wanted to see if those changes aligned with what I was thinking for the book. I wanted to know more about the publishers themselves. What similar titles had they published? Did they have any other big titles coming out around the same time as mine? Also, I wanted to know, like, when is their publishing schedule? I did hear like different publishing schedules. Some people wanted to publish in 2023. Some people wanted 2024. And that was something my agent told me to look out for. She was like, if you think that you're going to need more time for this, you might want to look for somebody who's interested in 2024. And then also just going more in depth into the editors list themselves. It was interesting to see all these editors who had authors. Do I know these authors? Do I want to read some of these authors' work? It's just kind of, you want to get a whole grasp of what they want to do with your book, but also what can the whole publisher themselves do for you? And also, what are they specifically planning to do for this book? We were also really blunt in asking, like, is this going to be a lead title at your publisher? How enthusiastic is the team about all of this? And some of the editors, like, they came to the meeting. Like, my editor who I ended up with, Stacy, she was the one who said, I want you to know that it's not just me who's in love with this book. Like, it's the entire publisher who is. And that's like a big key point for a lot of editors. A lot of them also outside of the calls, or they would come to the calls with blurbs from other people from the publisher saying, okay, look at all these other people from the publisher who are really in love with this book. And of course, I want to say during these calls, a lot of the editors, they kind of try to charm you in a good way. Because it's like, especially when you're in a competitive situation, it's like, oh, pick me. But it's a weird position to be in as an author, because until you get to this point as a traditionally or aspiring author, it's almost like you're the one querying at agents, and you're like, oh, pick me, come here. And a similar situation on submission for a lot of authors. So it can feel a little weird, definitely, on a lot of these calls. And especially if, like me, you were the type of author who didn't have a lot of you don't have like a bunch of books behind you and a huge fan base. And it's almost bizarre to hear another person talk to you about things that they liked about your work, especially when you spent a whole year like fixing things that you were just trying to improve about your work. But all around, they were all very interesting calls, and they were all very informative. I'd say all of them lasted around an hour, maybe an hour and a half long. And I did get to know some of those editors on a more personal level as well. And one editor and I gushed about the movie The Mummy for like 10 minutes long. pointlessly, but it was
That's
great.
fantastic, though. We like making the connections in this industry. Even if you're not going to work with somebody, it's good to have a conversation with them and to get to know them on a personal level in case you work with them on a future project. And I think it's very valuable that you pointed out this is also your opportunity as an author to ask questions. You should not be going into these conversations just letting them guide the conversation that you're having. And you brought a lot of really good and valuable questions to know where your positioning would be inside of each of the publishers that you could potentially be working with. So take us forward a little bit. You've gone through your meetings, you've had all the conversations, you talked about the great movies, and you talked about your book. Tell us what happens once it goes to auction. What does that look like for an author? Because a lot of people are coming in with a lot of great money and offers and ideas, and you have a waiting game, and you've got a lot of decisions to make. So what does that look like?
So first, I'll say that our auction was, from the point that we ended having editor calls, it was about at least a week and a half. It might have been 2 weeks from the point of ending talking to all the editors to actually having the auction. And my agent put that little bracket of time because some of the editors still had to take the book to acquisitions, meaning like they loved the book, but they had to go to their team and get the approval. And also anybody, even if you have the approval from acquisitions editors, they still need to go to their higher ups to get the terms for how much they're allowed to bid in the auction.
Right.
And it was just a good bracket of time for everybody to kind of, get themselves together. And maybe for me to mentally prepare, maybe that's why it was so long as well. So I actually did not know a lot about auctions, or I really didn't know anything about publishing at all going in, and I still learn new things every day. So my agent, of course, walked me through things. The way that we did it is she set up the grounds for the auction, which she sent out in another formal sort of letter type thing to all the editors, kind of the rule for how the auction would go. I'll say that we started with 8 editors, I think I mentioned, who I spoke to, who are all interested in the book, but we only ended up going to auction with 6. That was because one of the editors, after we sent out the grounds for the auction, they decided that they weren't going to be able to compete with all of the rules that we'd set out. And so they graciously backed out. And another editor, I had 2 editors from the same publisher, but from different imprints who were interested.
Okay.
And this publisher did not allow editors from different imprints to bid against each other. So they kind of put the ball in my court. And after I spoke to both of them, they said, please pick one who you would prefer to bid. And I was like, the auction hasn't happened yet, and I already have to pick someone. But tough choices must be made. So they were both really amazing editors, but I ended up picking the one whose vision I thought aligned more with the book. So in case they won, it would be the one at that publisher I would be going with. So we ended up with 6 total editors who were interested. So my agent sent out the rules. It included a floor, meaning like a minimum bid for the first day. She set up a 2-day auction because we had enough interest for that. And it would give kind of a day in between like first bids and last bid for publishers and stuff to get their ducks in a row as well. So it had like a bid, like a minimum bid in for an amount. And we got that amount based on, since we had a first offer from the first editor who was interested, since she actually put in an offer, we were able to say, well, obviously we need the minimum to be this first offer that we had. There were more specifics about like deadlines. Like I think we said 3 p.m. every day, like please have your final offers in. And I'll let you know that I'm going to be letting Kayvion look over everything. He's interested in publishing too. And also there was, where was I? I totally lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry, the puppy.
Distracted by pets. Oh, there was an interesting caveat that we were almost going to go with, and we stopped where my agent was going to add a clause that said after the first day of bidding, we're only going to allow the editors with the top 5 bids to move on, and number 6 to be gone. But at the time that we were considering doing that, there were still 7 editors who were going to be auctioning, and when it dropped down to 6, we were like, well, it's a little like tasteless to just kick out one person at the end. So we ended up nixing that clause. So you'll get like kind of the rules that your agent will send you, and then the auction begins. All of the editors, I won't say all, most of the editors, when they send over their first offer, like the monetary offer and the terms and everything, also sent over like a very kind letter or maybe a marketing plan. Usually just here's something that will be extra enticing. And that's another time when I got some of those blurbs from other people at publishers that were talking about, okay, well, look at so-and-so for marketing who's also in love with this book. And so it was kind of also a complete package that everybody would send over. One of the publishers did not send that at all. And I'll say that that is the publisher that I ended up going with.
Oh, surprise.
Exactly, yeah. And I love my editor for that, because she's so blunt, and she kind of came at it as, you've spoken to me, you know how much I love this book. I don't need to go into it anymore. And I appreciated that. But all of the overall packages and everything were so amazing and super informative. So by day one, you have the deadline of 3 p.m. Everybody got their offers in by then. I will say that our offers for day one it was bizarre, because they were almost all equivalent to each other. It was like the exact amount. And you have a call with your agent. You're going to be having lots of calls with your agent during an auction. I must have spent like 5 hours of phone time with her every day.
Wow.
And we were talking about the different offers, but they're all similar. And we were like, okay, we'll see what happens tomorrow. And then you go into day two of the auction. I actually am not sure if my agent went back and updated everybody about what the new minimum was. Perhaps that was something that I should have asked, but I don't know if she went back and if she was completely direct with the amount of monies that she was sharing with the other publishers, or if that was something that we were kind of keeping to ourselves at that time. But I know the next day she, of course, goes back and checks with the other editors and let them know that things are getting competitive, because, they want to stir the pot, your agent. They want everybody to like on their toes. So the next day, it's the same rules, where there's a deadline by the end of the day that all of the editors have to get their deadline, their new deals and offers into. And I was not expecting the numbers to be that much significantly bigger on day two than they were on day one, personally. But that was actually not the case. There was more difference in day one and day two than there was in from 0 to day one, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But I guess when you get towards the end of the auction, everybody gets anxious if your agent is doing their job right about trying to, reel in the win.
Right.
So, but by the end of the day of day two, we could kind of see that there were significant differences between some of the publishers, and there were two in particular who were really standing out. And so it kind of ended up for us coming down to those two. And they gave me until the end of the next day, which I'm saying that that's a significant amount of time. It felt like a short amount of time in the moment. Like, okay, you have until tomorrow morning to make this really huge decision. But they'll usually give you at least a day to sleep on things and to talk with your agent and figure out this huge decision in your life. But come the next morning, I thought through all of the publishers' different offers. I went through all the emails that I'd gotten from both of them. And I also went through and looked at the recent titles that each publisher and imprint had published. And I wanted to make sure, okay, who's not just the best editor for me, who's the best publisher for me. I talked through things with my agent. Things got a little bit more tense on the money side of things once it was down to two publishers. My agent was able to kind of go back and forth between both of them and be like, okay, well, so-and-so is going to do this. And that this person is a big baller. And so we got the numbers up a little bit more. But at that point, honestly, when I woke up, it was a Friday morning, the day after day two of the auction, when I was supposed to make the decision. Once I woke up, I kind of knew which editor I wanted to go with. I woke up and I was almost having a panic attack at the thought of not going with this editor. So when I spoke to my agent at I think it was 7 a.m., it was so early in the morning, I was like, I want to go with this editor. And she went back and she was like, okay, well, let me see if I can get this editor up even more. And I was like, okay, that's good. But if you can't get her up, I don't care. Don't tell me
do what you have to.
But I don't care. I need to go with this editor. And we ended up getting them up and it all worked out. And I ended up with my dream editor, Stacey Barney at Penguin.
I love that. And I love the behind the scenes look at how the auction works. I feel like we don't see that very often when we have conversations about how traditional publishing works. We talk a lot on the channel about what happens once you've gotten your agent and you've signed on with your publisher and what happens beyond that. But tell us from your perspective, just in short terms, once you've signed on, what does that process kind of look for you as you're moving forward?
With your editor at a publisher?
Yeah.
I'm sure it varies for different authors, and also depending on your timeline for a book. Are you having a book that's coming out, next year or within 2 years? The time that I signed, I knew it was May of 2022, so May of last year, and I knew that I had a release date of September of the next year. So it was about a year and a half that until the book one would come out. So the first thing we did, of course, was jump into edits because, edits start immediately. Edits will never end for you as an author. It's happening all the time. So I had a call with my new editor, I think about a week after we closed the deal. And we just had, my editor is a little bit different than my agent because they're different people, of course. So she was a little less formal with our first round of edits because we talked so much during our calls, our offer call, about things that she wanted to improve and change. And she asked me if I thought I could do an editorial round based on just the things that we'd talked about already. And I said yes. So I did my first round of edits, and then I did more and more edits. So basically the first few months of working with your editor, just more merry-go-round of edits. And I did get more edit letters after that first round and everything. But besides the editorial things, you also get to start doing fun things as an author at this point. I think it was maybe about 3 or 4 months after we signed that we started talking about cover things. I have an amazing cover designer, Teresa Evangelista. I mean, look at her. She's brilliant. And she created kind of I don't want to call it a pitch deck, but kind of like a Pinterest board almost of like, oh, here are like interesting designs. And they asked me, of course, for my input if I had a Pinterest board, because I think most authors have a Pinterest board of their cover inspiration. And I just didn't have one. So I was like frantically trying to put together one like in the middle of the night. And you get to do fun things like that. And also we started selling foreign rights at this point. Once you sell your main deal, you get to start selling foreign rights and everything too. We've sold, I think it's 26 languages that we've sold in so far. And I will say that those deals I had absolutely nothing to do with. The only one that I was significantly involved with, or you will be maybe as a US based author, is your UK deal. After your US publisher, they're the publisher that I work the most closely with, and the only other publisher who has had editorial input. Most of the time, it's just going to be your US editor or whatever country you're based in that you're doing most of the editorial work in. But the UK team that I have is so enthusiastic and has been such a staunch supporter of this book that they also have editorial input. The rest of the publishers, I was not involved in any of the auctions that happened. There were a couple of auctions. There were a couple of preempts, which is when a publisher makes you an impressive offer and asks you to take the title off the table for other publishers. But those deals, they kind of just came to me as emails where my agent would email me and it would say something in the email like Spanish offer. And she would say, okay, your Spanish agent, which I would like not know that I had before then. Your Spanish agent did an auction last week, and this is the person who won. Here are some details about it. Do you accept or not accept? And I would usually approve them because I trust my team. My literary agency, I'll say, they have an amazing foreign rights team that's built into my literary agency. So I have agents all over the world who I like barely ever have contact with, but like the book apparently. So you're doing things like that. And then you also, as you get further out into the year, I'd say maybe around December or January, so maybe about 8 or 9 months out from the release of your book, you start doing things like talking about marketing. You'll usually have a meeting with your marketing and publicist if you're lucky enough to have a publicist. I know not all authors are, but you should at least have somebody in publicity who's working on your book, and they'll usually have a meeting with you where they tell you, here are the things that we're planning marketing wise, and if we're going to be running ads, and here's the things that we're doing to promote your book. It's lots of small kind of fancy smancy, like technical details like that you get to start working on. And I think like most of the emails I get nowadays are things like that. Like, oh, look at this marketing thing, or look at this cover design thing, or amazing person who you should be having a podcast or a meeting with. Really, lots of like, it's all fun stuff to me.
Yeah. And you have a lot of fun things happening right now inside of your career connected to this book. You're actually coming back for upcoming episodes where we're going to be breaking down some of the other things that you've got going on right now, including a video. So I'm very excited to have you back for this conversation. Before we let you go, thank you so much for being here. Where can everybody reach out to you to have conversations with you on social media, check out your website, etc.?
Yes, definitely visit my website, which I totally did not make myself on Squarespace, or maybe I did, but you can't tell. KayvionLewis.com, or you can hit me up on Twitter, which I think is called X now, at Kayvion Lewis, or on Instagram at Kayvion C. Lewis.
Follow along for daily videos to help you navigate the world of publishing, from your writing to your publishing to your marketing. We want to make this as easy as possible to make this your most profitable year ever, with less time, less stress, less effort, so that you can live your best life while also living out your author dreams. We'll see you in the upcoming episodes.